What if I told you that Joe Biden was never in charge at the White House? And what if I told you that the New York Times just inadvertently admitted it? You'd never believe something like that, would you? Well, wait a minute. In a story about a San Jose State volleyball player named Blair Fleming, another man on the women's team, according to the New York Times, there were officials in the Biden administration who believed that transgender athletes had an unfair advantage over women. And most important, one of the officials holding this view was Joe Biden himself. And Biden was particularly focused on the unfair advantages that male athletes had over women. But that's not what we all heard. Joe Biden never said any of that publicly because Joe Biden was never really in charge. Joe Biden was overruled by somebody because even though he was president of the United States, it was in name only. It was only for the cameras. In reality, he was never in charge. Joe Biden was overruled because someone else was actually running his White House. And the official policy of the Biden administration for 4 years, there's Leah, go Leah, was that only men were allowed to compete against women if they wanted to. But men, we're talking about men with male parts. All of the male parts. They were allowed to go into women's bathrooms and women's locker rooms if they wanted to, as the Biden administration embraced the fantasy of a tiny percentage of the U.S. population. And over the weekend, at the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner, one reporter seemed to recognize a little bit that maybe the national media missed or even deliberately covered up what was going on at the White House for the last 4 years. Take a listen.
President Biden's decline and its cover-up by the people around him is a reminder that every White House, regardless of party, is capable of deception. But being truth tellers also means telling the truth about ourselves. We, myself included, missed a lot of this story, and some people trust us less because of it. We bear some responsibility for faith in the media being at such lows.
Oh, what a hero. We bear some responsibility. We bear some responsibility, and everybody started clapping like Alex Thompson was so brave. You don't bear some responsibility, you bear all of the responsibility. You, the legacy media, bear all of the responsibility, and it is because of you that Donald Trump won the election again. So don't include me in your we, because we never lied to our audience about Joe Biden. We knew there was something terribly wrong, and we called that out. And you laughed at us for 4 years, but we were right. And you have been exposed because you are all liars, something that Caroline Leavitt addressed in a rare Monday morning press briefing today.
Millions of Americans watched our mentally incompetent president struggle with his day-to-day duties of this office. We watched our country be ran into the ground as a result, and nobody in the media wanted to write about that, talk about it. There were many reporters, I will say, right-leaning reporters who did talk about that, who didn't get awards, didn't get coverage. In fact, they were lambasted for their coverage. I think it's about time the legacy media finally admits that was one of the greatest cover-ups and scandals that ever took place in American history, and certainly it did contribute to the decline in the trust that Americans have for the legacy media.
So what has changed since Donald Trump took over 99 days ago? Well, not much if you're the legacy media. Fortune magazine with this headline on Saturday: the Vatican asked Pope Francis' funeral attendees to wear all black, but Donald Trump wore a blue suit instead. My goodness, on the surface you see that and you might think, geez, Trump either did that on purpose or nobody told him to wear black, until you widen out that very same photograph right there and realize that 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of the people seated around Donald Trump were also wearing blue suits. It was 80 degrees in Rome on Saturday. This was all outdoors. It would be very hot in black. The truth is that for more than 4 years, we were told that Joe Biden was not only cogent, but that this version of Joe Biden was the best we've ever seen.
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever. Not a close second, and I've known him for years.
The most difficult part about a meeting with President Biden is preparing for it, because he is sharp, intensely probing, and detail-oriented and focused.
Okay, so let's take a look at the guy we were told was ready for another 4 years in the White House. On Saturday, Joe Biden couldn't get around without help, which happens. Not only that, but he needed a member of the church, a Monsignor, to get up out of his chair to help Joe Biden down a set of stairs. At this point, it's clear that Joe Biden, our sharp, fit, cogent former president, not only needs a cane, but he probably needs a walker. And I'm not saying that to be cruel. And I know I'm not a doctor. I would never armchair diagnose somebody, but just like every single day that Joe Biden was president, I do have eyes. And they tell me that that man right there, Joseph Robinette Biden, is not steady on his feet. Clearly. Contrast that with Donald Trump. While Joe Biden was busy negotiating those stairs, Donald Trump was negotiating an end to Joe Biden's war in Ukraine. Donald Trump meeting with President Zelensky inside the Vatican on Saturday. And I'll tell you what, if you're going to end a war, I don't think you could find a better place to do it, or a more symbolic place above the grave of St. Peter. But the legacy media didn't see it that way. The New York Times writing about Donald Trump's 14 hours in Rome, fleeting encounters amid global discord. We'll put up that photograph one more time. Does this look like a fleeting encounter to you? We don't think it does. That looks like maybe the most serious encounter any two people had at the Vatican all weekend long. To the New York Times, I guess this is a serious encounter here. Joe Biden takes on the stairs. Right there, a very serious encounter. On Friday, Wisconsin Judge Hannah Dugan was arrested by the FBI after she reportedly helped an illegal alien escape from her courthouse. They had to run down the street to catch this guy and make the arrest. As a result, Judge Dugan has been charged with obstruction of justice, which is a federal crime, but the media didn't see it that way. Take a look.
There's this individual case of this judge. There's also potentially the intimidation factor towards all judges, right? That this has an effect on trying to scare and intimidate judges into not ruling against Trump.
But much of what this is about, which became almost immediately clear, is making an example out of her for other judges around the country, and not just on the narrow question of immigrants in courtrooms. It's to make an example to the dozens of judges that have ruled against this administration.
Her arrest also marking a new flashpoint in the administration's verbal attacks on judges who have ruled against parts of the Trump immigration agenda.
Lester, that's not really what happened. You should maybe proof some of your own copy. I know you're on the way out the door, but that's not what happened. Judge Dugan usually wears a black robe, but I hope she likes the color orange, because if she's found guilty, that's what she's going to be wearing. It's as simple as that. But the media didn't mention any of that, as you just saw. They didn't mention that the illegal alien that was allegedly being protected was charged with 3 counts of domestic abuse. He was beating up women, and those women were in the courtroom. They wanted to testify against him, but that never happened because someone apparently opened up the side door to that courthouse, and off he went, scampering down the street. But according to CNN, arresting Judge Dugan in public was somehow performative.
When you start looking at how the judge was treated after the events that led to the charge, so where and when and how she was arrested, and the fact that she was arrested at the courthouse rather than her own residence, the fact that she was placed in a jail cell for hours before her arraignment was called in the court later in the afternoon, these things are unprecedented. Typically, upstanding members of the community who have no criminal history and aren't accused of a violent act are allowed to self-surrender at the time of their arraignment. The fact that they did not offer that courtesy to her and instead went out of their way to treat her harshly, I believe is an act of performative cruelty on behalf of the Department of Justice.
Oh, did you catch that? An act of performative cruelty by the Department of Justice, says of all people, Andrew McCabe. An act of performative cruelty. All right, Andrew, why don't we run with that? I'm so stunned that I live on the same planet as these people sometimes, because this is just so ridiculous. But Was it an act of performative cruelty by the Department of Justice when the FBI raided Mar-a-Lago in the middle of the night and searched the First Lady's underwear drawer? Was it an act of performative cruelty taking the mugshot of a former president, probably the most famous person on earth? Was that performative? What about raiding Roger Stone's house and somehow there was a CNN camera there when it happened? How did that happen? Did somebody tip off CNN? We think so. What about putting Steve Bannon in jail? Or Peter Navarro? They put Peter Navarro in jail. Guess what? He's back in the White House now. How do you like me now? What about putting a gag order on the leading candidate for president right in the middle of the campaign? Was that an act of performance, Andrew? We think it was. We think all of it was. And now it looks like a judge might have broken the law, a Democratic judge. And it looks like she tried her best to help a criminal illegal alien escape out the back door of her courtroom, but suddenly arresting a woman who might very well be a criminal in public is an act of performative cruelty. It's not. It's an act of performative justice that is long overdue. So get used to it. Something tells me she won't be the last.
Information. Truth is freedom. Is Newsmax. It's real news for real people.